Downtown Columbus, broad and high.
You might just call it the center of the city. It certainly was the center of the social justice movement as protesters clashed with police after the murder of George Floyd.
This area may no longer be filled with protests every night.
But the calls for change can still be heard.
Our streets! Our streets!
So 1 year later, where do we stand? What's actually changed? ABC 6 digs deeper to get to the core of what's at stake.
Rising crime, social inequities, racial justice, and reimagined public safety. Tonight, you'll hear Voices for Change.
Good evening, I'm Stacia Nucken.
And I'm Rodney Dunnigan.
Just around the corner from Broad and High is City Hall, and Columbus Mayor Andrew Ginther has a lot on his plate.
And he's discussing all of it with us. From dealing with the pandemic to calls for police reform, and now what seems to be nonstop violence across the city.
All right, Mayor Ginther, first off, thank you for your time. I know you're a busy man right now. Obviously, we're going to focus on some of the violence that's been going on in the city. But before that, I want to just ask about you. How have you been doing? I mean, this has been a year. We're kind of moving out of the pandemic. You've dealt with the pandemic. You've dealt with protests in the streets. You dealt with issues with the police department, selecting a new police chief. Just you personally, how have you been over the past year?
Well, my faith has really guided me and sustained me through this time, as well as my family. And then the incredible people of Columbus, you know, the resilience they show every day when we were facing some of our most challenging, darkest days. The people of Columbus have continued to inspire me, and I am grateful for the opportunity to serve as mayor. I still think I've got the best job in the best city in America, even with all of our challenges. Because the people of Columbus are pretty special, and I'm thrilled to be serving as mayor, even in challenging times.
And when you talk about those challenging times, obviously we're kind of, at this point, hopefully moving out of the pandemic. Something that's very pressing for your administration right now, the violence in the city. How troubling is that as the mayor?
Very troubling, because I'm not just a mayor, I'm a dad. And the amount of violence that our young people are facing, and you know, both as victims but also as perpetrators, is something that is exceptionally bothersome and frustrating for me, and something we need the community's help with. I mean, the Bicentennial Park shooting, for instance, we still, you know, there were 100 people at the park that night of those shootings. We've had no one come forward to share information and offer any information that were there that night. That's a failure on behalf of the community. We need to step up and encourage, you know, we know the young people there that night may have images and video on their phones, because every young person has a phone. And so we need parents and grandparents, you know, to take care of getting their kids information, sharing that information with the police, so that hopefully we can get folks that committed that crime and other violent crimes. We know it's a real small percentage of people in the community that are committing these violent crimes. We need the community's help in getting those folks off the street and making sure our kids are safe.
And when you say, you mentioned you're a dad, as a father, how heartbreaking is that when you see kids involved in these crimes and being the victims of these crimes?
You know, it gets to you at your core. You know, we need our kids to be safe in this community. We need our families to be safe in this community. We can do it, but it's going to take all of us. You know, the Division of Police cannot make this community safe all by themselves. We've got to all be engaged in part of that work and effort. Our faith community, our nonprofits, our youth providers of summer programming, we all have a role to play. The business community, with respect to hiring young people through summer youth employment opportunities, we all have a role to play in making sure our kids have a safe summer.
That's something that you've really kind of hammered home as of late, that community involvement. Why is that kind of a term? Because obviously you've had a number of initiatives, and we'll talk about some of those initiatives, but just stressing that the community, it's only so much you guys can do. You know, you put money into different programs in the community, but why is it important for those, you know, fathers, those mothers, those grandmothers, those people that are in the community who know who's committing these crimes, that they step up and report these folks?
Absolutely, you know, and in, you know, putting in place curfews at the household level, you know, knowing where your kids are. There were many kids that were down there the night of the Bicentennial shooting who weren't necessarily in violation of the curfew based on their ages and the time that shooting took place. But I'm encouraging parents and grandparents and caregivers in the community, institute your own curfews in your own homes and make sure that you're doing your job as parents, monitoring where your kids are going, who they're associated with, and making sure that if they do have information about any violence taking place in neighborhoods, whether that's on their young people's phones or information they've gathered from the kids in their home, that they're sharing that information with law enforcement to make sure their children are safe and the children throughout this community are safe as well.
What about those folks who say, what is going on with the city of Columbus? I see these, homicide numbers hitting record numbers, record pace.
Yeah.
But you have said that it's not just Columbus that's facing these sort of problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that you're seeing more and more national attention on now, the rise in violence in cities across the country, and not just big cities, but mid-sized cities, competitive set cities to Columbus. And it's something that mayors and police chiefs are really struggling with across the country. My responsibility is to the people of Columbus, and so continuing to take a comprehensive approach, having public health involved through the CARE Coalition, our APPS program that does intervention work with young people at recreation and parks, having the Department of Neighborhoods through My Brother's Keeper and other initiatives, and obviously public safety, neighborhood safety, making sure that our officers are out there building meaningful relationships through the expansion of our Safe Streets program, our bike patrol unit. So we made that duration longer this year and added another shift. So we're going to have more officers out in our neighborhoods who are pretty much completely dedicated to proactive community policing, building relationships, so that hopefully information and tips can come from the community about solving some of these crimes, but also helping to bridge the gap and divide that's out there between the police and communities of color. We believe that this change, the reform, the hiring of a new police chief, first time ever, we've had a chief come from outside the division, is really going to help lead us from from being a 20th century law enforcement organization to a 21st century community policing organization. But that's going to require a huge shift in culture as well as we do that.
And speaking of that new police chief, is that something that you've discussed with her before you brought her on board, that, hey, we're seeing this increase in crime? Does she have a plan in place to kind of address some of these issues?
Absolutely. We've been talking about several strategies that she has seen used around the country. There's a network of chiefs, just as there's a network of mayors that talk about best practices, things that have worked in other communities. Some violence is different, but a lot of the spike in youth violence that we've seen, both as victims and perpetrators, is something that definitely has a national trend to it as well. So what can we learn from other places around the country that has proven effective? We believe this comprehensive approach, wrecking parks, neighborhoods, public health, and police is the best way forward.
With some of the research that you guys have been doing, because I know you've been looking into this, what are some of the root causes of some of this that we've been seeing as of late? I mean, is it kids with no jobs? Is it the pandemic? What are some of the reasoning behind some of this?
Yeah, it's complicated. Obviously, a proliferation of guns, particularly illegal crime guns. I mean, right now, it is far easier to get a gun than a job for young people in our community. That's wrong. We need the state and federal government to step up and pass what overwhelming majorities of bipartisan support for banning assault weapons, and a red flag law to keep, guns out of the hands of violent people who have shown violence against even intimate partners and children, a universal background check. All common sense thing that 90% of Americans support, Republican, Democrat, Independent. That's an important step. Another important step is making an unprecedented investment in young people. And that's what we're doing with this first installment of dollars from the American Rescue Plan. And we're grateful to President Biden, Senator Sherrod Brown, Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, who helped deliver that to Columbus. We'll receive $187 million in 2 tranches that has to be invested over 4 years. We're spending nearly $20 million of that money to invest in young people this summer youth employment, summer programming, summer camp, other great ways for young people to grow and develop, and a credit recovery program, because we know there are a number of seniors that fell behind in Columbus City Schools during the course of the year that we want to get caught up and graduated by August. and juniors that fell behind that aren't going to start their senior years in August on track. And we think that's a critical place where we can help to restore some of what our young people have lost during the last year.
And I also have to ask you, obviously the climate in the country right now, as well as with Columbus, you know, the almost adversarial relationship between the mayor's office and the FOP. And some folks who are in support of police say that, you know, kind of that adversarial relationship is leading to some of what we're seeing because the criminals don't believe that the cops have the backing of the mayor's office. What would you say to somebody who has similar?
Well, there isn't really an adversarial relationship between the mayor and the FOP. The adversarial relationship is between the FOP and the community. The community has demanded change and reform, and they've done it at the ballot box through their overwhelming support. 75% of the people of Columbus want a civilian review board. They want an inspector general. They want them to have subpoena power. And we're at the negotiating table right now, negotiating in good faith. And we believe the FOP should listen to the people of Columbus, the people that they have sworn to protect and serve. And so this really isn't about the mayor and the FOP, it's about the community. And we know the overwhelming majority of our officers show up every day and do incredible work for the people of Columbus. But we also know we have a cultural problem. And that's laid out clearly by evidence. You know, systemic racism exists everywhere in our society. It exists in your newsroom, the mayor's office, state government, federal government. So there's no reason for us to expect and believe that systemic racism doesn't exist within the division of police. We don't need to own that systemic racism. We need to acknowledge it exists, and we need to own the remedy. And that's what all of our change and reform efforts is all about. And I think we'll go a long way to restoring trust and confidence with the community, oversight, transparency, accountability.
We're just entering the summer season now. Is there a fear that the violence that we've been seeing will only kind of increase as more people are outside, you know, kind of moving past the pandemic, more events are going on? Is there a fear with you that we could see more of this?
Well, obviously, we only will have a city as safe as we're willing to fight for it. And that means making sure we're investing in young people, doing our jobs as parents and grandparents, taking care and raising our kids, being engaged in their lives, knowing where they are, who they're hanging out with, making sure we're stepping up and stepping forward with information that we may know connected to crimes to get violent people off the streets, to keep our families safer. We know that all those things matter. I'm confident with our comprehensive approach and the community's commitment. You know, our faith leaders are stepping up like never before, offering to mentor young people this summer, help them navigate and find some summer youth employment opportunities. More and more community groups, our partnerships with the Wise and otherwise, to pay young people to help clean up their neighborhoods, pick up litter, and do community and neighborhood-based beautification efforts. We think are all going to pay huge dividends this summer and into the fall.
And just the last thing I have for you, for those folks out there who may, you know, read the newspaper, see the reports of different crimes, what would you say to them to say that, you know, obviously Columbus is still a great city, still a safe city?
You know, obviously we have work to do. And we know that the violence we're seeing here and that cities are seeing across the country is unacceptable and it's not sustainable. And in order for us to change, you know, here in this community, it's going to take each and every one of us stepping up, rolling up our sleeves, doing our part to make our community safer. Employers have a role to play, faith leaders have a role to play, our schools, our parents, our city, and our division of police. But no one of those entities or organizations is coming to save us. We've all got to do our part to make the change and to make this community as safe as our kids deserve.
Every night we talk about the rising number of homicides here in the city of Columbus. It's a major focus here at police headquarters.
We're on pace for a record-breaking year, but these are more than just numbers. Their families changed forever. Because of the sharp increase in cases, it's creating issues in resources to solve them. We heard that from Deputy Chief Tim Becker, who oversees major crimes. He gave us an eye-opening look at game-changing factors like retaliation, lack of witnesses, and some disturbing trends. What else do we know about the trends that we're seeing here?
It's about 80% black. There's The average age is in the early 20s. We hear a lot about juveniles, but actually the people getting killed and doing the killing, the averages are 24 roughly years of age. But we see it across the spectrum. You know, we'll have a homicide of an infant, we'll have a homicide of an 80-year-old in a typical year, but those averages just seem to be that core group of people. A lot of them are engaged in illicit activity, robberies, drug sales. There seems to be a lot more, I will say, bullets flying this year. And when there's bullets flying, the more bullets that are flying, the more likely an innocent bystander gets hit. And there's been some of that this year as well.
How do you adjust for that? When you're talking about an innocent bystander, that's definitely an anomaly from other situations that you may find and encounter on the streets. That's a different kind of crime out there, isn't it?
It is. It's, again, just tragic. You know, every life lost, regardless of what people are engaged in at the time that they lose their life, is tragic. And my detectives take it very seriously that they become the voice speaking for the decedent, because nobody's left to speak up for them. And that's why they want to solve the cases. But it's especially hard to explain, not that it makes any sense when somebody's engaged in illegal activity and gets killed, but when somebody's in their house down the street and there happens to be a drive-by and a totally unintended victim gets shot or killed in or near their house, there's really just no explanation for that. And dealing with the families and how that can possibly happen. You know, everybody wants to feel safe, especially at their home. You know, all of us would like to think we go to bed at night, we're gonna get a good night's sleep, wake up, be refreshed for the next day. But the reality is most houses aren't constructed to stop bullets. And bullets traveling through walls, through windows, have been striking people inside their houses in the last 2 years at a higher rate than normal.
How much of what you're seeing on the streets right now with the violence has to do with retaliation?
There's a small number of people responsible for a great percentage of the violence. Some estimates that we've done some evaluations with researchers who have looked at our community specifically estimate that 10% of the people are responsible for 50 to 60% of the violence. So it really isn't a big problem in terms of the number of people that are responsible, but they are wreaking a lot of havoc on the community. And again, if they're willing to shoot somebody or pull a trigger, shoot at a moving car, they aren't really concerned about where those bullets end up if they don't hit their target, or even that they're willing to pull the trigger to start with. They're not really worried about the repercussions to them for doing that.
What kind of challenge does that present in finding witnesses to help solve these crimes?
That's always been our biggest challenge, getting witnesses to come forward. There's a couple aspects of that. The witnesses have to trust the police. And as we know, there's been an issue with that, and maybe that's exacerbated a problem over the last year. So, the Columbus Police, we try to work hard to build that trust, but we can do better.
This last year really has shed a lot of light on the fractured relationship between the police and the community members in some cases. How do you work to mend those connections while continuing to battle the violence that we're seeing on the streets?
Yeah, so that's very challenging. Really, having that trust is all about relationships. And as all of us know, building relationships takes time. You don't build a relationship today. I can't say I want a relationship with the community and it's going to happen by tonight. But it can start with a conversation today and then another conversation tomorrow, and just build on that over time. And I do believe we'll get there. But in the interim, these officers that are out in cruisers that would like to have the opportunity to build these relationships, because of all the violence, they're going to guard duties because we have to secure these vast scenes, often for long periods of time, especially if we have multiple scenes, because we only have so many crime scene investigators, we only have so many detectives to process it. So while they're sitting there tied up guarding a scene, protecting a crime scene, it's taking away opportunities to be in the community, engaging in relationship building. So they kind of work against one another. You know, if they had more time, they'd have more opportunity to build relationships. But right now, because of the violence, they have less time, so it's even more challenging.
How do you balance that, the proactive nature of seeking those relationships in the community and the reactive nature of there's a crime scene, we have to react? How do you balance that?
The reactives are always going to come first. You know, we get the 911 call. We don't get a 911 call from somebody who says, I want you to come over and establish a rapport with me. But we do get the 911 call when there's somebody bleeding because they've just been shot, stabbed. And we're always going to prioritize those, and those go first. So the thing that always gives is the officers proactive time, or the time to go build relationships, and it's just doing our best to manage that. You know, officers would rather engage in a friendly conversation with somebody any day of the week than respond to another shooting.
With the fear out there, people are angry. We've all been through a lot over the last year, some communities more than others, being isolated with the pandemic. How do you police communities that are bubbling over with feelings like that when it seems to be bubbling over into these crimes? How can you reach the folks in these communities?
So that's going to be our challenge, and we're trying to work towards that direction right now. It takes that spending time to getting to know one another, to being present in the community for good things and not just bad things. It's great when we can do stuff that's not enforcement related, but you know, the basic task given to police officers is to enforce the laws that the legislators pass. And so law enforcement, by virtue of its name, police are always going to have to be the enforcers of the unpopular rules at times, and that's sometimes swells up the undercurrent in the community that stands in the way in relationships, but it's what our job is to do. And then simultaneously trying to have those good relationships reach out to these kids and youth and get a better understanding is a challenge. And as somebody who's born and raised, grew up in this town, grew up on the hilltop. We didn't necessarily care for the police. My mom was not happy when I became a police officer because I think she had a misunderstanding of what the police did. And the stories of myself or my brother or somebody in the neighborhood getting pulled over just created a narrative that maybe wasn't true, maybe was partially true. You know, when we came back and we got pulled over, maybe we weren't always truthful with our parents exactly why we got pulled over. And so then it manifested in my parents not really liking the police. And we never got to talk to them. You know, they came to our house if we were a victim of crime. They came to the scene if we were in a traffic accident. But those are some of the worst days of your life. So that's not the day to start a relationship with somebody. So I think it's just finding people on their good days, finding people in need and helping them. And that's happening every day in our city. There are hundreds of officers doing great things right now as we speak that most people never know about, they don't want any notoriety for. But it's going to take a lot more of that. And then it's going to take spreading the word in the neighborhoods from the people who have the positive interactions. It's not, police can't do this ourselves. It's going to take the community coming together and saying, enough's enough. We don't want any more violence. We don't want any more bloodshed. We don't want any more death. We have to make a change as well. So while police are changing, there simultaneously needs to be a shift in the neighborhoods in our community.
What are you hopeful for in this new era of Columbus Police?
I'm hopeful for a step forward. I think we've been kind of stuck in a rut for a year, and I think there's a lot of optimism. We have a new chief coming in, new leadership. Our officers are always looking for solid leadership, and Chief Bryan, I've heard her state in many interviews already. I've yet to meet her, but I've heard her state in many interviews, you know, the officers are doing the right things for the right reasons, that she's going to have their back. And I know that's how myself and my peers feel. The officers are doing the right things for the right reason. We are going to be supporting them, but I don't think the officers have always felt that way. I think the officers have felt maybe they aren't going to support us, they aren't going to have our back, and the community's often thought that they're going to support them regardless if they're right or wrong. And I think Chief Bryant's going to help us bridge that gap, and we're going to get to a better spot.
So you're hopeful about what's to come?
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to her succeeding, because if she succeeds, then I succeed. All the men and women I have the honor of working with every day succeed, and ultimately our community succeeds.
With violent crime and homicides on the rise and the spotlight on the frayed relationship between the community and police, there is much at stake.
And there are new challenges with recruiting in law enforcement and expectations, especially from city leaders looking to reimagine policing and public safety. It's created a pivotal moment inside CPD. I talked about that with Sergeant James Fuqua, who you'll recognize as a spokesman for the division. He's another officer who is from here, loves this community, and recognizes the enormity of the next steps forward. We know gun violence is an issue. The homicide rate is shooting through the roof. What are the biggest challenges that you see right now in this city that you love, that we all love?
It's exactly what you just said. It's the amount of violence, and it's the different types of violence. So yes, our homicide numbers are at an all-time high, and that's concerning because I don't look at them as numbers. Those numbers are people, and those people have families, and they are left behind tragically to pick up the pieces when they're left. But not just those numbers. Our felonious assaults, different types of crimes against people are all up. So the fact that so many people have such easy access to guns in our city right now is extremely concerning, and we have to figure out a way to stop that.
When you look at all of those crime rates going up, and there's also the challenge of that frayed relationship with the public. How do you prioritize that relationship while still fighting the crime that exists?
Communication. Communication is key in every relationship. I don't care if you're married, if it's a friendship, the police and the community, truly communicating on a level that both can understand is the most important. Trying to get from call to call to call because we take so many. Sometimes we need to learn to take a step back and invest in that particular call that we're on and really get down on the level of the person we're talking to, because they may be crying out for help in certain areas that if we just slow down, there's so many other things that when you start peeling back the layers, you find out, well, here's a real root of the issue, not the reason why we were called.
What do you say to potential new recruits, and are you having trouble finding them?
Well, the numbers are clearly down, so we are, the last 2 years are not getting the numbers of applicants as a whole. And I think a lot of that has to do with the social justice movement and the civil unrest that we faced not only here in Columbus, but nationwide last year, because people see that this is a very difficult job, and they understand that that may not be something they feel comfortable doing, and I completely understand that. But one thing I will say about recruiting, I feel, in my opinion personally, that the challenges in recruiting when I was being recruited in 2002 are the same things that exist in 2021. You know, we always want to put all these fancy spin on things, but at the end of the day, the best recruiters are us. And yes, we have a recruiting unit who works very hard and does a fantastic job, but we as police officers who are out there on the front lines trying to help the community are the best recruiters, because I know when I go work a neighborhood and I can identify someone who could make change, it's my responsibility, again, not to go just to that call for service, but to actually explain to them that they would be a very good fit here, and you see qualities in them. So you have to uplift people and give them the positivity to even think that they can do this.
Reimagining policing is a term we hear a lot from Mayor Ginther. Is that a term you use here in this building?
I don't think as officers, because we're in it, we see it as reimagining police. We do talk about having to reshape and refocus how we police and how we think during our policing. So you can use whatever words you want. It's kind of all of the same concept, but we don't necessarily feel we need to reimagine, but we do acknowledge that we need to reshape and rethink our focus on how we do our job.
There's a lot of balancing of expectations within the department. You have the expectations of the mayor, the public, the department itself, and then your own expectations. How do you balance all of those expectations, because sometimes it doesn't seem like they're all in line?
Yeah, it's not a true to scale in terms of the weight, meaning, yes, I have to balance my personal expectations to what my boss says and what bosses outside this building say. So it's hard. And I'll be honest, right now, specifically for patrol officers, they're in a tough spot where I know many of them want to do the right thing all the time, and they are focused on why they took that oath to do their job. But sometimes there is some outside pressure from social justice movements that we talked about, or certain social groups, or some officers may be afraid when they're trying to do their job that in this age of cell phones that something can be recorded and misunderstood because they've already been having an interaction with someone, and then the recording comes on after the fact. So there's bits and pieces that may be lost. Now granted, we have body cameras, but in the back of many officers' minds, they truly fear by doing their job and doing it correctly that publicly they still may be shamed or ridiculed for a decision that they may not think was appropriate. So it's a tough balancing act, and it's really hard for officers to go out and do their job without things in the back of their head that they worry about in terms of outside influence.
How do you explain that to someone you're recruiting into this career?
It's very hard, and at the end of the day, you have to tell them the truth. And these are some of the truths that they may be coming into. But what's also important when you talk to that person that you're recruiting is you tell them bluntly that we believe in what you have the ability to do. And if you are doing the right things for the right reasons and the right intentions, then everything will work itself out. I know it's easier said than done, but you truly have to trust and believe in yourself first as a human being and as that person willing to accept taking this job. But we also have to encourage the new people that come in that they're capable of doing it and not to give up.
What does success look like, let's say a year from now, 5 years from now, under new leadership, given the reckoning that we have seen of the social justice movement and the reveal of the frayed relationship that we have with the police and the public? But it sounds like there's a lot to be hopeful for. So what would you define as success going forward?
That's the million-dollar question in law enforcement, right? What is success? You know, if you have 100 car thefts in this year, well, if you only have 99 the next year, technically that's success by measurable numbers, but we know 99 car thefts are still 99 too many, right? So we want to make sure by every measurable account, whether it's a crime against a person, a crime against property, or the most important part of this that will help reduce those, in my opinion, is the community engagement. That success will be defined as the community truly buying into a new culture here at CPD, buying into what we are doing, and that customer service shining through that we want to talk about. So that is the truest measure of success for me, but everyone has their own definition, and the community may have a different expectation of measurable success. But at the end of the day, if we are not doing better than what we did yesterday, then we're not successful.
At the end of the day, when we're talking about these huge issues of mental health, addiction, people in crisis out there in the community, a pandemic, police community relations, at the end of the day, is there a simple message? Is there a simple solution?
You know, I've thought long and hard about that, and I don't know what everyone's definition on that would be, but I know for me, the messaging is always do better. And that goes for officers, that goes for the community, that goes for anyone that's a social justice warrior or activist. No matter what your role is in this city, always try to do better, because none of us are perfect, and we all need everyone to do better.
In light of the recent deadly violence across the city of Columbus, the local NAACP is stepping up and speaking out.
The organization is calling on the community to work together to keep kids out of harm's way and hopefully save lives.
In fact, the organization's president, Nana Watson, telling us it's not just city leaders or the police who have the responsibility of dealing with this issue, but the entire community as well.
How do you feel about what's been going on across the city lately?
Well, it's sad. I hate to see young men and women pulling out guns and shooting each other as though that life didn't matter. And it hurts to the core. This community has become so violent, And we've got to come up with ways to channel that violent behavior somewhere else. We've got to stop it. Young people have got to stop and begin to value their lives and that of others.
And obviously, this is not an issue that is just in Columbus. I mean, we're seeing it at cities across the country. What do you think is some of the reasoning behind it? I mean, whether it be, jobs for youth or just activities or maybe coming out of, COVID, just everyone locked up. What do you think is some of the reasoning behind some of the violence that we've been seeing?
Well, people say it's COVID. Well, I say maybe, maybe not, because if you were in the house and you couldn't go out, aren't you doing things with your family? Aren't you engaging in conversation with your siblings? So I'm not going to blame it on COVID. I'm going to blame it on lack of respect for each other, lack of respect for one's life, as though that person doesn't bring value to our community. We've got to begin to programs we have for young people. But I wonder, rather than plan for, why don't we plan with them? Why don't we ask young people, what type of activities would you like to have? Night basketball in the evenings, that's fine. But black children need to learn to do other things. For example, chess, soccer, all the things that maybe they don't have in their neighborhood. We need to begin to expose our children to different things in this world.
And when you talk about crime, obviously everybody points to police and what police can be doing to make the situation better. We'll get to that in a minute. But a lot of these crimes are involving kids. What do you think the community can do, families can do, to kind of help out with this issue?
Well, I believe that there are no consequences in our community for bad behavior. When you've got a gun, you go to the courts, you get an ankle bracelet, and you're off. But these young people know how to take that off. There are no consequences. This community has got to begin to work with the judicial system and engage them in why is this happening? Do we need to change laws? Because there's no consequences. I know one judge in particular, if she has someone with a gun charge, that young person stays locked up. That's the type of things that we need to be talking about with our judicial system. We need to work together, and then we need to bring the police officers in. We've got to, everybody's got to come to the table and come up with some sound things that we can do together as a community, because we need to be healed. There's no trust in our community toward the police.
And what about parents? Do you think they serve any role in what we've been seeing?
Well, yes, I do believe, but for some reason, our parents, I don't know if they're lost, if they don't know what to do, if there's no hope. I'm troubled by that. I don't know what we can do, because I know that parents love their children. I like to believe that they do, but they've got to have a conversation. They can't be afraid to have a conversation with their child about anything. They must take responsibility. While we love our children, the children in our community belong to all of us. And we've got to stand with that parent to make sure that we can help guide that child down the journey called life.
And when you talk about the police part in this, you said there's a lack of trust between the community and police. What can they do as far as boots on the ground to kind of connect with kids, connect with the community that can potentially, help out in this effort? If nothing else, at least the police can get information potentially that can make arrests in some of these cases. What sort of things can police do to kind of build that bridge with the community?
I think that our police officers can embrace differences. I think our police officers should know their community. I believe that they need to be seen in the community, having a conversation with a child, with a grandparent. Have conversation with the residents in the neighborhood that you patrol, so they'll know you and you'll know them, because trust with the Black community and the Columbus Police Department is tarnished at best.
What do you think can be done to maybe get more people from the community, kids I'm talking, involved in the police department, to want to be police officers, to want to be the police chief? What do you think can be done to kind of build that bridge, to kind of have that connection, because that would help potentially in some of the diversity issues and some of the connecting to the community. What can be done to get those kids maybe on the street to maybe one day want to be a police officer?
Well, you know, many, many, many years ago, there was the Police Athletic League, and it was on South Champion Avenue. And police officers were in there, and they had activities for the young people. They encouraged them to do their homework, to see what they did as police officers. If we had something like that to bring back the Police Athletic League, I think we might see more interaction with the Columbus Police Department and our black children.
What about, obviously, we've had a change at the top of leadership. Columbus Police Department recently, African-American female is now the police chief,
Yes.
as well as the assistant chief now. Do you have any hope that maybe with new leadership coming in, that could maybe change some of the issues that we've been seeing as well?
I'm hopeful. I believe that the chief, in one of her statements to the community, she talked about drilling down to elementary school to begin a conversation about becoming a police officer. What does law enforcement do? I believe she said that. You may want to fact check me, but I believe she did. And if that's what she's going to do, I think that will make a difference, because you need to begin to talk about law enforcement when they're little. You can't wait until they're in middle school, because they already have an idea and they've seen not nice things that officers have done to individuals when they're supposed to protect.
For you all, the NAACP, do you all have any plans in the works or maybe discussions about maybe programs or partnerships that you all can do with the police department that can kind of help out with this effort as well?
Yeah, we have partnerships with the City of Columbus, as well as the county and the Sheriff's Department, but certainly we're engaged with law enforcement. We were responsible and pushed for the body cameras. We are still going to be looking at that, because I believe they're going to add on. They're going to do something with the body cameras, and we will certainly be engaged in that. The NAACP demanded a citizens review board with subpoena power. That took place. We were very proud of that accomplishment, because we have been trying to do that for many years. So to answer your question, we're there. We're looking at the body cameras, we're looking at the court system, and then we're looking at the Sheriff's Department to make sure that they are addressing diversity and inclusion, and they are sensitive to the black community wherever they may see us.
From a city standpoint, are you happy with what you're seeing from the mayor's office? I know they're pumping funds into youth programming and job programs for kids. Do you think that can help out in this effort too, or do you think more needs to be done?
I think we always need more when we're talking about our young people. We always need more. I think what the city is doing is great. We need to embrace that. We need to volunteer. We need to know what is it that they need from the adults in this community to make these programs successful. If the program is successful, we believe the children will be successful.
You mentioned a bit earlier, when it comes to these kids who are involved in these crimes, there's kind of a lack of respect for life. If you could talk to these kids one-on-one, what would you tell them about how they should respect life? Not only somebody else's, but their own, because even if they aren't a victim of these crimes, if they're participating and they go to jail, their life is still over.
I think I would tell that young boy or that young girl that look inside and begin to love yourself and go deep and see what prompts you. What are your triggers that make you have this not so good behavior? And then when you look at somebody else, you need to look at them as though you're looking at yourself. And if you're looking at yourself, you're not going to hurt yourself. You need to dig very deep and find out why and where did this violent behavior come from. And I ask you to put down the guns, because this community loves you, and we're in pain right now, and we're fearful for you, and we just want you to stop. And we love you from the bottom of our heart, and we just want you to have a successful life on this journey.
Do you think more kids need to hear that from different individuals and their families and their communities?
Yes, I think our children want to be loved. They want to be disciplined, but they also want to be loved, and that could be the factor that pulls it together. To love, to see somebody as yourself.
The last thing I have for you, we have already hit kind of a milestone when it comes to homicides, unfortunately, here in Columbus for the year, and the summer is just getting started. Do you have hope with discussions that you all are having with the police department, with the community, what the city is doing, and what different outreach groups are doing? Do you have a hope that this violence can be kind of brought down or brought to an end before we kind of finish out this year?
Rodney, I'm hopeful. If I had a crystal ball, I would want it to say violence will end tomorrow, but I don't have that. I'm very hopeful if this community bands together, the faith-based community, the county, the city. We've got to stop it, and we all have to come together. We can agree to disagree, but it should be for the common good of this community, not for Nana's or not for you, Rodney. It's for the common good, not individually.
We also got a chance to sit down with new CPD Chief Elaine Bryant. The discussion, one of her first since taking the job just weeks ago.
And she tells us she's ready to hit the ground running and address these important issues head on.
It's tragic, and it breaks my heart, some of the things that have occurred and the loss of life of these children. So, I want to make sure that we do everything on our part to provide a safe environment for the children to be able to go out and have fun and not be worried about that, or have parents concerned about their children going to a park. That should be the least of our concerns as a parent, but unfortunately it's a reality right now, and it's something that we have to address.
One of the top priorities for Chief Bryant, dealing with the rise in violence. She addressed that reality with our Luann Stoya.
That absolutely, as a parent, I absolutely understand their concerns. I want to make sure that my children are safe, so I consider all the residents in the city of Columbus my children, so I want to extend that same thought and process and the feelings to them.
And also building trust with families, dealing head-on with the issues of the past.
It's important that we're transparent and we're having those conversations with them so that they know that, we want to mend those fences in that relationship. We want them to come forward and be able to trust that when they give us information that we're going to act upon it. We couldn't do this job without them. They're our partners.
Bryant states it plainly. It will take that partnership between police and the community to save lives.
I just want them to know that they have my support, that we're going to move forward. They're going to be included in a lot of conversations in regards to some of the things that we want to do moving forward. I won't make decisions in a bubble, things that are going to affect not just the officers, but the community too. So I'll be including them in a lot of conversations as well. So it's important that we have those conversations, let them know you can trust us, give us the information, and build those bridges and mend those gaps.
Tonight you heard from the voices on the front lines for change in our community, from the mayor, the police, and neighborhood leaders.
But one message remains constant. It will take each and every one of us to make a difference, to make an impact here in the city that we love, and to move Columbus forward.
From all of us at ABC6 and Voices for Change, have a good night.